Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Med Safety Exchange webinar series, a joint venture by the Institute for Safe Medication Practices Canada, or ISMP Canada, and the Canadian Patient Safety Institute, or CPSI. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded, and the link to the recording will be posted on the Med Safety Exchange website about 1 week later. We do have all the lines muted, so we encourage any questions or comments to be typed to us in the chat box, and then we'll read them out loud at the end of the webinar during the discussion period. The purpose of this webinar series is to bridge the silos in healthcare reporting and sharing and provide a platform for us to share and learn from one another to minimize the recurrence of med incidents and optimize med safety in all care sites. Now, we conducted a preliminary evaluation of the Med Safety Exchange second year, so 5 of the 6 webinars, and even though Mike will go through these findings with you a little near the end of the webinar, I'll just cover a few quick details about the website since we did have several questions and clarifications about what's available. So firstly, every webinar is recorded and posted on the website about 1 week after the live webinar. So you can click into all past webinar dates and access those webinar recordings. Secondly, as of last year, you can access links to materials and resources presented during the webinar that presenters are able to share. So this is added at the time that the webinar recording link is added. And not all organizations are able to share, however, so not every presentation will have this link beside the title. But we are grateful to those who can share, as we've had very positive feedback from participants who are able to adapt that information for their internal work. Thirdly, as of last year, the Med Safety Exchange does have a new email address, so please send any comments, ideas, or follow-up to the Med Safety Exchange at ismpcanada.ca. And on the Med Safety Exchange website, the big green comments button under each webinar links directly to this email address. And also any requests for the PDF version of the slides can also be sent to this email address for a faster turnaround. And fourthly, the Med Safety Exchange is not accredited because we didn't want to specify certain healthcare professional groups and/or provinces, so we are offering certificates of attendance so that you're able to submit it to your respective colleges or associations and ask about continuing education credits. And these can be done retrospectively because the links are available for all past webinars. So now on to today's overview. So for this webinar, we will have 1 med incident analysis on a dosing error with a high alert medication, an anticoagulant, and an overview of the pilot for educational support for Vanessa's Law. This will be followed by an observatory with the preliminary evaluation of the Med Safety Exchange, and then we'll finish up with the discussion period where we read out your comments and we keep the learning going. And as always, anonymity is a choice for all those involved in the webinar, so I'll only introduce speakers briefly, and they can choose to share as much or as little as they'd like about themselves or their practice site. I'd like to invite the first speaker to present a med incident analysis on the miscalculation of a weight-based anticoagulant dose.
Thank you, Ambika. Hello, everyone. Pleased to be part of this today. So background on the incident that occurred. The patient was ordered a treatment dose of enoxaparin 1 milligram per kilogram subcut twice a day. They recorded a weight of 69 kilograms at the time. So with a small rounding, the order was ultimately profiled as 70 milligrams at 10 and 2200, which are the standard medication administration times for enoxaparin at our institution. And using the multi-dose file, 100 milligram per ml, 3 ml, the volume of the 70 milligram dose was calculated at the time of the administration to be 7 ml. This was not the first dose of the order. So the patient received 700 milligrams as a result. Almost immediately, the nurse caught the error. The nurse felt that there was the volume that was administered seemed incorrect and not usual. went to the charge nurse to advise, and the prescriber was contacted. Also reached out to poison control. These were done via phone calls for direct communication. Orders were received from poison control and agreed to by the physician. This consisted of a reversal agent and monitoring was the immediate redress. And the medication was subsequently held and then restarted a couple of days later. A little bit of background on our institution. We're a nearly 400-bed community hospital with paper charts, and we do have CMARs, which are printed 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the acuity of the unit. And at the time, we were using enoxaparin multi-dose vials for treatment doses. So some of the potential contributing factors, the lack of inclusion of the volume of dose on the CMAR. What this meant was they had to calculate each time they gave a dose how much the volume would be before the administration. And a question that might come up is whether or not the nurse would document the volume on the CMAR. We have an example on the next slide of what it looks like. It's generally, they wouldn't document that post-CMAR print. There are some cases I've heard of, though, where manual additions are done to highlight a piece of important information afterwards. So human error in repeatedly performing the calculation. This is kind of a case of when, not if you're familiar with the concept of preoccupation with failure, since this is human reliant. The failure is going to occur. It's just a question of at what point it does happen. To rule out things that were not seen to be a contributing factor, clarity of labeling or dose expression on the actual vial itself was not felt to be an issue in this case. So here you'll see an example of the CMAR printout. You can see the dose, the drug up at the top, and it shows the dose, but there isn't a volume equivalent that's expressed. And as I mentioned, they merely sign that the dose is given for the appropriate dosing time. So some other potential contributing factors, we do have lower staffing levels during the night shift. It's my understanding that's fairly regular across hospitals. So what does this lead to? Could be higher workload, interruptions. The scheduled staff were there, so it was not short due to illness or sick calls, but the ratio of the patients to nurse does increase. Fewer opportunities for staff to get a double check if they were inclined to ask for a double check on something when it comes to administration. Also, no pharmacist available on the unit overnight. Currently, pharmacist hours are 8 to 2000, although someone's available on call 24/7. And also unfamiliarity with the treatment doses versus the prophylaxis dosing of enoxaparin. Our staff are very familiar with VTE prophylaxis. We've had it in place for years. All of our patients receive enoxaparin 30 or 40 milligrams, generally unless they have a contraindication, and those are supplied as unit dose. So what did we do as far as analysis is concerned? Well, we had a couple of meetings internally. We had one right on the unit, actually in the staff room with many of the staff that were working that day. We also had the unit pharmacist, risk management, myself. We felt it was very useful. Staff gave us good feedback on it as well. It was very valuable. We also felt it really helps to set the tone to support the culture of safety. Very much discussions about process versus people. And then we submitted the report to NSER, which allowed ISMP to follow up with us. So some of the strategies and recommendations that we came up with were the pharmacist could write a clarification in the chart for these anticoagulant orders. So they would include the volume as well as the dose. I will note the limitation that that's a very manual process, and there may still be a disconnect between the chart and the MAR. Another thing we talked about was requiring an independent double check for treatment doses only of low molecular weight heparin products, and also to consider the elimination of the multi-dose vials. And the way you would get there is by implementation of a dose banding initiative. So going to the dose banding initiative is something that we did. You can see an example here of the products that are available. We did education on both the concept of dose banding as well as the device operation, because this is a safety engineered device, And the keen-eyed ones will notice that there's a variation between the syringes up to 100 milligrams and the others above that. That's because they're manufactured in different parts of the world and the mechanism's a little bit different. That allowed us to almost completely eliminate multi-dose vials of Lovenox in our institution. So here's an example of the preprinted order set that goes along with the dose banding. It's a key element, obviously. So it does include a weight-based chart for the practitioners to be able to determine first dose. I will point out that that's generally only used once, and that would be an overnight first dose, as generally the correct form is going to be profiled after the pharmacist has reviewed the order the following morning. So you can see over here on the right-hand side, the example of the dosing chart. So that's actually the back of page 1 on the order set that we saw on the previous slide. So as far as feedback, we've had no negative response whatsoever. One of the challenges that we deal with is still we don't see treatment doses for Lovenox very often. In fact, we're likely to see less of it as the order set includes the newer oral agents that are now indicated, and we also still have a heparin infusion nomogram for this indication. The people that we've spoken to about this incident and what we've done about it have been generally pleased or satisfied with what we've done as an intervention. So we've taken it to our patient safety and medication safety committees, as well as shared it with our senior team. And that about concludes that part of the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing this incident analysis with us. There are several safety elements involved, including a higher alert medication like enoxaparin, the value of independent double checks, and the reduction in calculation and measurement errors with pre-filled syringes versus multi-dose vials.
You're most welcome.
Okay, so I'd now like to invite our second speaker to provide an overview of the pilot for an educational approach to support Vanessa's Law. The law requires hospitals to report serious ADRs and MDIs to Health Canada.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambika. This is Sylvia Hyland from ISCP Canada, and it is a pleasure to be here and to let you know about a pilot project that started this week to provide education to support implementation of the Protecting Canadians from Unsafe Drugs Act, also known as Vanessa's Law. And this act gives Health Canada additional powers to collect post-market information, take stronger actions when a risk is identified, and it also increases it gives the power to increase the transparency of safety information. There are several amendments that were made to the Food and Drugs Act with this law, and the one that our work is focused on is number 6 on this slide, which is the mandatory reporting of serious adverse drug reactions and medical device incidents by healthcare institutions. And to let everyone know on this call that the proposed regulations will apply to all hospitals. So this educational approach that we're piloting this week is an education approach in outreach. It's being provided by a joint venture, and the partners in the joint venture are ISP Canada, CPSI, and Health Standards Organization. I will say that we've met with and worked with many partners across the country to create this education content and our stakeholder outreach plan. So thank you to many of you who are on the call and others across the country. So the goals of the education approach are, firstly, to raise awareness of the proposed regulations and to also provide core content about adverse drug reaction and medical device incident reporting that will be useful to anyone. The idea is that the content will be useful to healthcare leaders, healthcare providers, educators, and also importantly, patients and families, so that they are also empowered with the knowledge about the requirements and the value of reporting harms from drugs and devices, so that we can ultimately use that information in our healthcare decisions, in our treatment decisions. So based on our needs assessment and an implementation plan, we developed 5 PowerPoint modules. And one of the principles that guided this work is that those who are closest to their audience are best positioned to teach and convey the education content. So for example, hospitals can include some or all slides in their orientation. Educators can use some or all slides as part of a presentation or in a curriculum. Professional associations, colleges, and societies can use these slides and embed them into an accredited course or a certification program. Patients and consumer organizations can use the slides to increase awareness amongst their members. So that's the design and the approach that we've created. So the 5 modules, I'll tell you a little bit about the 5 modules cover, and this again was based on a needs assessment and then an instructional design document that was created. So the first module gives an overview of Vanessa's Law and the proposed regulations and the reporting requirements. The second module talks about a culture of safety, the value of reporting and learning systems, and it also describes the definitions and the differences between an adverse drug reaction, a medical device incident, and a medication incident or an error, because we heard that there's some confusion around the different reporting programs. The third module describes the various adverse drug reaction and medical device reporting systems that exist currently in hospitals, and it also provides some examples of leading practices in this area. There is also draft new forms that Health Canada is creating to facilitate reporting, so those are also shared in these modules, and also the data elements that are going to be important to include in these forms as hospitals report ADR and medication device incidents. So we give that information, the reporting processes within organizations and how they can be leveraged with the needs and reporting processes that Health Canada has. So the fourth module talks a little bit about the barriers to reporting that we found through our research and also describes various system supports that can facilitate reporting. And again, in this module, we give some examples across the country of work that's been done where hospitals in Canada are already planning the implementation of the requirements of Vanessa's Law. And the fifth module is Health Canada is devoted to the work of Health Canada to share the work that Health Canada does to raise awareness about their review processes, their assessment processes, and their various mechanisms for communicating safety findings. So this slide is to welcome all of you. The pilot did start on Monday. We welcome additional individuals who might want to look at the modules and give us feedback. You can email us at info@ismbcanada.ca. We're hoping to get a brief questionnaire completed by April 15th. And the questionnaire will ask you, is the information helpful? Do the slides provide a good understanding of what needs to be reported? Do you envision that the approach will work for you and others? And is there additional information or formats that you think would be helpful for delivering education or learning about the Vanessa's Law implementation of mandatory reporting? I will add that once we have received the feedback from the pilot participants, we will be creating final modules. So in the pilot, the modules are provided as PDF documents for view and comment. Once we receive the feedback, we will create final PowerPoint presentations that are slides that people can use, one slide, any slides or modules to embed into their programs, presentations to help educate all Canadians. So I thought I would take a few minutes now to just show a few of the slides in the modules to give you an idea of what these modules contain. In Module 1, this slide, Who is Vanessa?, helps everyone to know that the law was named to honor the memory of Vanessa Young, a girl who was 15 years old when she died of a heart problem after being prescribed cisapride. And this drug is now no longer on the market. We quote from the book written by her father, Terrence Young, who has helped lead the way for these new regulations and authorities for Health Canada. This second slide from Module 1 lets you know that we describe the timeline requirements for mandatory reporting. So this includes the requirement for hospitals to report a serious ADR or MDI within 30 days of it being documented in the patient's medical record. And that the implementation, the reporting requirements will come into force in December of this year. So the next slide is there to illustrate the various stages, and we have a similar slide for medical device incidents or medical devices. It's the stages of drug testing and research and then release to the market to convey that it's after a drug or device gets onto the market where post-market monitoring is so important, and adverse drug reaction and medical device incidents are so important, because then this is the time that these drugs and devices are used in the larger populations, and that all of us can contribute to reporting and learning about drugs and devices on the market. So in Module 2, we also, as I mentioned, we try to differentiate between ADR, MDIs, and medication incidents. We have a visual overview of the different reporting and learning systems in Canada, and we illustrate how these learning systems work together so that we can create stronger knowledge and safer products. So this is an example of a new form that Health Canada is creating. There will be a new form for mandatory reporting of serious adverse drug reactions and a new form for medical device incidents. These forms are provided in draft in these education modules, and when the final modules are created, will be replaced with the new actual finalized form. And here is, I mentioned that we give some leading examples across the country. This is an example we understand from Alberta Health Services that they have been working to integrate adverse drug reaction reporting within their electronic health record, and we see this as a leading practice, and we want to share information. I think there are 3 slides on this in the module. We want to share information around some of the work that is being done in various provinces, and I chose this one to highlight for today's presentation. So in Module 4, we provide some self-assessment questions for hospitals as they prepare for the mandatory reporting requirements. We share some of the barriers that are in place that need to be considered, and we also share facilitators for creating processes for mandatory reporting. Another thing that we share in the modules is some work that's being done and is underway in Health Canada to facilitate data flow from hospitals to Health Canada, recognizing that hospitals have systems in place that is gathering this information, and that ultimately technology will help us to get that information in an optimal way to Health Canada. So that work is also is in development, and we share that with the participants, and that information will be provided in the final modules as well. So 2 slides from Module 5. Module 5 is very much focused on the work of Health Canada. We share information about the review and assessment processes when they receive reports. And in the next slide is just one of many where we share where information from Health Canada is located that provides information around safety of products, drugs, and medical devices. And one of the things that we learned in our needs assessment is that many people do not know about all the good work that Health Canada does. So our attempt in Module 5 is to bring that forward so that everyone can know, everyone in Canada can know about all of the work that Health Canada does. So for example, that there is a searchable adverse drug reaction database, and that there is a new medical device incident database. So we share that in Module 5. And that was really it. I think that's my last slide, Ambika. I wanted to share a little bit about the pilot. We welcome anyone on the line to join the pilot. It's just started this week, and we welcome your feedback, and thank you for the opportunity to share this information.
Excellent. Thank you, Sylvia. You know, it's really so important for us to know this information so we can support Vanessa's Law and contribute to the safety information for Canadian drugs and medical devices. So we'll now get into the observatory, which will be focused on the preliminary analysis of the second year of the Med Safety Exchange. So as with last year, we did conduct an evaluation of the Med Safety Exchange to identify what went well, what areas we could improve on, so that everyone could get the most out of this initiative. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Mike Hamilton from ISMB Canada to take a quick look at some of our findings.
Thank you so much, Ambika. We've had another really successful season, I think, and it's been a true privilege to work with everyone involved from the team here, and especially those who contribute, those who present to us. Presenters have been so generous this year with their time, and I think we are much richer for it. We've all learned so much, and we certainly cannot produce this without you. So as Season 2 draws to a close, it's important, I think, to take some time to review your feedback and comments and really to seek to make Season 3 even more valuable to you. We do want to maintain the Med Safety Exchange as an information sharing forum, and we want you as an audience to be actively involved. We want providers to continue to engage in medication safety with each other, and we want the webinar to be important and helpful to you, so please continue to send your feedback. We made changes in response to feedback after Season 1, and we will continue to do so. We want this to be about you. So some of the highlights regarding feedback from last year, from Season 2, our average viewership is up around 12% over the last year. And importantly, I think we continue to attract new viewership. So people who have not ever signed on before continue to sign on a new basis. And we're doing what we can to ensure relevance to those who are a bit more faithful and who sign up every second month. We continue to engage practitioners and presenters from around the country with a stable international presence as well, albeit small. In terms of feedback, the majority of the audience does find the webinar worthwhile and that they learn something or they capture an idea that they can take back and implement in their own organization or in their own practice. We do have involvement from participants across Canada, and in fact, our largest per capita audience does come from PEI. In some cases, however, we maintain small numbers, and we would, of course, like to grow that audience. So our ask of you is to please reach out to your networks and help us to increase viewership. And please feel free to forward any invitation you get with respect to the Med Safety Exchange to anyone you think would be interested. I think we all recognize the importance of a mature safety culture, a just safety culture, a safety culture of learning and improving. And I'm very pleased again this year to report that you, the audience, do find presentations like this beneficial, that you continue to be interested in implementing the ideas, and that there's real value in sharing and learning around medication incidents and initiatives. And in the spirit of continuous improvement, the feedback often includes suggestions for future webinars. And one suggestion that arises frequently is to include topics from community pharmacy, nursing, long-term care, cancer care, operating rooms, amongst others, and to encourage a wide variety of different disciplines and different care areas. And we certainly agree, and we do want to provide a broad range of topics. And we believe even if the setting is not your own or you are not in the same discipline, you can always learn from the experience of others. So if you feel your discipline or your setting or the topics that interest you are underrepresented, please step forward and talk to us about presenting, and we'll always work with you to develop a topic. And I think the next two bullets about objectives and takeaway points are related and are very well taken. And we as editors and moderators, and along with the presenters, will focus next season on highlighting key points and objectives of the presentation. We receive a number of excellent suggestions for topics throughout the season. And we don't want the Med Safety Exchange to be CPSI or ICMP Canada presenting to practitioners on topics. What we aim for is for the Med Safety Exchange to be practitioners presenting to practitioners. We want to hear of your challenges and your initiatives and your projects. And if you've engaged in an initiative on any of these topics or are simply interested in any of these topics, please let us know and we can work together to develop a presentation. Maybe you have, for instance, an old conference or meeting poster you can develop into a presentation. Maybe you delivered a local pharmacy rounds or a grand rounds and you would like to update and deliver that presentation. Or maybe you transition to a new service delivery model or have a new suite of products or just run into challenges. Please tell us of your experience. And you may think you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. I don't think anyone here has all the answers. But some of these topics can be very, very complex, and even presenting on the challenges can spur fruitful discussion. And remember, we're all in this together, and we're all trying to improve. So please connect with us if you're interested in any of these topics or any other medication safety issues or challenges or initiatives.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to all of our speakers for the excellent learning shared today, and to all of you for helpful comments and feedback to keep us on the air and continuously improving to meet your needs. We'll now turn our attention to the questions that we've received throughout the webinar and have our presenters elaborate.
Thanks so much, Ambika. And we have a number of questions today, and please feel free to continue submitting them if you have anything that we don't cover. Our first few questions will go to the enoxaparin case. First question, when you state you have eliminated multi-dose vials, are you referring to enoxaparin only? Are there other multi-dose vial drugs in your hospital that you have considered?
It's a great question. We also did the same thing with dalteparin at the same time. It has an order set as well. Interestingly, we got rid of most of our multi-dose vials. They were phased out years ago when we first put automated dispensing cabinets in.
And we'll move on to the second question. I think it's commendable that you've removed dose calculations from the bedside. And it appears you have an independent double check at the bedside for low molecular weight heparin. Do you have a system to double check the pharmacy calculations or other calculations that are on the pre-printed order?
I would say sort of as part of the order check. The weight is written on the order set on the front of it, so that would be compared to the dosing chart. We are also looking at rules in our system for order entry that would be weight-based. So there you could kind of put guardrails on those concentrations or those strengths within certain weight bands.
Number 3 and 4, I'll sort of ask together. It would seem with availability of pre-filled enoxaparin, it would be useful to remove the multi-dose vial from general stock and just have pharmacies send daily pre-filled syringes from a multi-dose vial if a dose above 150 milligrams is needed. Have you considered that approach? And secondarily, as an alternative, could you use combinations of pre-filled syringes instead of multi-dose vial? For example, to use 100 milligram plus a 60 milligram pre-filled syringe to make 160 milligrams instead of the multi-dose vials.
Mm-hmm. So vials are no longer stocked. We took them out of circulation when we did the dose banding. The pre-filled syringes are loaded in the automated dispensing cabinets. They are not on override, so the idea is that the pharmacist is going to review the order before they access it. And we avoided the combination idea. One of our goals was to keep it to one poke, if you will, and so we felt that our dosing chart, what was available, allowed us to do that. So to go from 60 up to 80, you know, basically if you're 69 kilos, you're going to get 60. If you're 71, you're going to go up to 80. Although I will mention, as we were rolling it out, that was probably the only incident that I'm aware of, and it's kind of only partly an incident in that they calculated that the dose in this case should have been 70, and they used a 30 and a 40, which they were very familiar with and had already.
Thank you. We'll move on to our presentation about Vanessa's Law. Our first question is an interesting one. As a pharmacy manager at a facility, I believe it will be my role to report ADRs and possibly MDIs, meaning medical device incidents, to the system. Is there some advice on oversight in managing the process of implementing Vanessa's Law? Is there help on getting others involved and engaged in the work?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I can say that the first national organization expressing interest in joining the pilot was the Canadian Society of Hospital Pharmacists. So hospital pharmacists will undoubtedly play a very important role as an interdisciplinary team member and contributing to the hospital process for how mandatory reporting will be implemented. We see many team members working together. I have a few examples that come to mind. There's a hospital in Quebec that has a pharmacist who is the pharmacovigilance coordinator, and that person will work with what they call a medical archivist, or what we might call someone from health records, to implement mandatory reporting. Another example is a hospital, province-wide hospital, that has developed medical device safety support teams to create champions and leaders in that team, and to give them the responsibility for helping to roll this out. There is also a provincial steering committee in another province that comes to mind, and these are all described in the slides. So we do see that there are, opportunities for champions and leaders to help make this happen in the hospital. So thank you for that question, and yeah.
My second question related to Vanessa's law, would participating in this pilot be useful for me? This is a professional practice / quality lead person in home care in the community.
Well, I want to thank you for that question, because I didn't mention that although the focus for these slides is on the new law and mandatory reporting, we do share information about voluntary reporting of adverse drug reactions and medical device incidents that has existed and continues to exist and is very important. So the slides provide information overall around reporting and learning systems and why they're important, and also the various pieces of work that Health Canada does that I think is important for anyone in healthcare to know about, because their communications, their safety communications, their information generally available helps us all make decisions in our treatments and our healthcare decisions. So the work of Health Canada informs everyday decisions that we make around the risk-benefit ratio of a drug or device, or the harm-benefit ratio of a drug or device that we're considering for our own treatment or for the care of our patients. So I'm hoping that you will participate in the pilot and you will give us feedback, because we really do hope that the content will be useful for any Canadian.
The third question is, what will happen after the pilot? When's the rollout? What will it look like? What will we be expected to do with the final product?
So the final product is scheduled to be released in July. So once we have the participant information and feedback from the pilot, we will be going back to these slides. We will be creating final PowerPoint slides. They will also incorporate the actual forms that Health Canada is creating, the actual regulations, not the proposed regulations. We will make those slides available in the hopes that this will be core, consistent education content for use by anyone who would like to help implement the work of mandatory reporting. And as I mentioned earlier, it's envisioned, our approach is envisioned that these slides will be easy to download, lift, embed into any programs that exist in your hospital or any care environment. So in other words, to help explain and teach about this new law in Canada.
Excellent, thank you. So I do see that we still have some questions coming in. I'll ask a couple questions that I see for Mike, and then, if we have time at the end, we'll keep going back to our other presenters. So the first question for you, Mike. I enjoy the webinar, but sometimes after the end, I'm not sure what to do with the information. So I'm not sure where to go next with what I've heard, and so can you provide any comments on that?
Thanks so much for that submission, and I think we recognize that that's a valid challenge for us. It's a valid criticism. And this is certainly not a reflection on the presenters who've really done tremendous work over the past couple of seasons and have really been generous. This is sort of on their own time, and they're sharing, and it's not the easiest thing to do. And I think this is on us here as moderators and facilitators and editors to give you, the audience, more in the way of clear and useful takeaway steps, and really highlighting areas of what we think is important, or what we and the presenters think is important, and to really focus the learning on that. And so that's something to look for in the next season.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I do see another question. Would I need permission from my facility to do a presentation?
Interesting question. I think in general the answer is yes. And this is particularly if you're using organizational products or policies or educational materials, and certainly if you're relaying organizational experience. Having said that, we would certainly work with you to get that support and that permission. And we've found certainly that facilities are typically very proud of the work they've done, and they're really more than eager to share their experience and good work. So if you're unsure about permission or any other sensitivities, please feel free to connect with us, and we'll work through the issues with you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just do a last question for you, and then I think we'll have to move back up to some of those other presenters. So it's on the West Coast, the webinar happens at 9 a.m., which is a busy time for us, and we're often tied up in clinical duties. Have you given thought to changing times or rotating times for the webinar?
Yeah, that's a challenge. Canada, I think, is about 5,000 kilometers on the long axis, and they have 6 time zones. Chile is about 5,000 kilometers on the long axis and has just 1 time zone. So Canada is geographically configured in a suboptimal way, I guess, for national webinars. And we do get this comment often, and we struggle with the best approach. If it's too early on one coast, it's too late on the other. We have thought about alternatives, including additional webinars with the same content, or tape delay rebroadcasts, or rotation of webinar times. Most of these do have some downsides, though. But as we think about ways to solve this, I do encourage you to, if you've missed the webinar or otherwise occupied, to catch the recorded version on our YouTube page. And this is accessible through the Med Safety Exchange website.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to add that, if you do see the recording, you do lose that opportunity to ask questions. If you wanted to email us questions, we could always pass those on to the presenters, and if we're able to get answers for you, we will touch base. So I think we'll just jump back up to the first presenter. There's one more question. So is there any challenge with weight being provided to dose enoxaparin and treatment doses for VTE prophylaxis and treatment, and our prescribers find it challenging to come up with a weight?
Sure. So what I'm hearing there is someone else is struggling with weights just across the board, which, yes, reflects our experience. We've had a number of events reported that are around weights missing or unclear. So we've been looking at clarifying processes around weights in general. It's a broad topic. As you probably know, it's mentioned in the Targeted Med Safety Best Practices. And it includes things like, do you have the right equipment? Do you accept reported weights or estimated weights? How often are the patients weighed? The documentation, again, this is where part of the problem is we have a paper chart, so it's sometimes written on the paper chart but might not make its way into the information system. So again, that kind of hybrid issue definitely contributes to it. So yes, we do have some issues, but the pharmacists will try to clarify weights if they're missing and make sure that they're populated kind of across the system. I hope that answers it.
And a second follow-up question for you is, were you able to address the display of the medication and volume required on the computerized MAR?
Yes, insofar as the multi-dose vials, the prefilled syringes are built with the volume included in them. So the correct volume shows on the MAR now, on the CMAR, as they are unit dose products.
All right. Move on to a couple more questions from Vanessa's Law presentation. The first one, are any fields in the mandatory ADR and MDI reporting forms for hospitals marked as mandatory?
Yes, so In the slides, we do describe what is envisioned to be the required data elements that need to go into Health Canada, and they would go through that form that you're seeing, or they would be pulled from the hospital system. So the hospital would be considering in their reporting systems the required data elements that are going to be needed to give to Health Canada when there's a serious adverse drug reaction or medical device incident. I do think it's possible that the final forms will highlight in red the mandatory fields, and we'll see that when we see the final form. But regardless, there will be clear direction to hospitals as to what are the key data elements that need to come from the hospital to Health Canada with a report of a serious adverse drug reaction or a medical device incident.
And the second question is, how have the various professional colleges been engaged regarding Vanessa's law? And this person is thinking especially about the colleges of physicians and surgeons.
Okay. So two things come to mind as I prepare my response. One is that the law is unique and very thoughtful in Canada, that it's not about, unlike other countries in the world, that the professional is responsible for the reporting. The way the law was designed is that it's the hospital that has this information in their charts and is responsible for creating a system to gather serious adverse drug reaction and medical device incident information in a way through interdisciplinary teamwork and then over to Health Canada. So that's one important point that is made in the modules. The other thing is that in determining the education content that we identified in an instructional design document that was needed by Canadians, we did review a lot of information, including many consultations on the law by various organizations around the country. So in that sense, we tried to consider different viewpoints as to what would be important by different individuals in Canada, including professions. Having said that, we would welcome anyone and we did give a broad invitation to thousands of representations across the country to participate in the pilot. So we're hoping that we'll hear more from the pilot, including colleges of professional regulatory colleges. So I hope that answers that question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I do see one last comment that I think we have time for Mike. So the comment is, I appreciate the willingness of presenters to share their project on the webinar, but also to share some of their documents and materials. It's really helpful as we develop our own policies to read someone else's ideas.
Thank you. It's a comment we receive often, I think because there are very few resource sharing opportunities for some of the good work we do and some of the good work that facilities do. And that's an area that we'd certainly like to grow and continue as sort of a clearinghouse of some of these policies so that one does not have to reinvent really good materials all the time.
Excellent. Thank you. So I know we're running low on time, but I just see one last question just for clarity. Regarding Vanessa's law, all information will be released in June 2019, but won't be mandatory to report ADRs and MDIs until December 2019. So please confirm if my understanding is correct.
So that's correct. All of us, Health Canada's team is working to get the required information out by June 2019. We will be getting the education modules finalized July 2019 to help with the rollout. And it's true that there's a number of months where all of this work can be done to implement the requirements, to implement processes for the requirements, but they don't come into force until December 2019. So that understanding is correct.
Great. Thank you again. So we do want everyone to be part of the Med Safety Exchange, so whether it's an incident analysis or a Med Safety initiative, please email us to share the learning. And please don't forget to fill out the poll that's now available on the right panel. And those same questions will be asked in an email to those who registered, so whichever is more convenient for you to complete. As you've seen, we do review all of that information, and we do really want to be responsive to your feedback. So again, the link to the recording of this webinar will be available on the Med Safety Exchange website next week, along with any resources that could be provided by the presenters. And a PDF of the slides is available upon request to the email address on the slides. And the webinar dates for 2019-2020 have not been confirmed yet, but they will be posted on the website next month. So please check back then to plan your year. And we'll continue with the bi-monthly schedule that we've had in year 2. So thank you again to our speakers for the important analyses and strategies shared today, and to all our participants for joining the discussion and helping to share the learning. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in 2 months. Bye for now.